What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Buffalo Dash. We are T-minus 10 days away from that November 7th date we're all hoping for. Big day, start of college football season for the Pac-12. That being said, let's jump right into our first topic, which is our week one opponent, UCLA. Kieran and I did a little bit of research on how we think Colorado can beat UCLA. Kieran, what'd you
So I
find? What do you
found
think?
a team that is, I think, not going to serve as a formidable opponent at all to the Buffs. I know we've talked, a lot about sort of just basing our assumptions off of last year's performance by UCLA, sort of throughout the season, that they were one of the weakest teams, if not the weakest team, sort of in the Pac-12, and so that was a sign of positivity going into this season. And after doing a little bit, sort of more of our research into what they, who they've lost versus who they have returning, I think that it, I would double down on my previous assertion that I think this is a great team for the Buffs to start out the season against. But how about yourself? You find anything of particular note?
I agree. I agree. I thought last year's loss was really frustrating because I thought Colorado was the better team. But obviously we were away in the Rose Bowl, and just an overall really frustrating game. Offense couldn't seem to get going. Our defense couldn't seem to get stops. But that being said, I think this year, like you said, is much different. I really don't see UCLA being that much of a formidable force. I do think the game's still going to be a good game. I think it's going to be a shootout. But that being said, I do think Colorado can exploit UCLA's weaknesses, one being their offensive line. Now, me and you have talked about just how good this Colorado defensive line is, and we've stressed upon the fact that this defense is going to win us games. So, if this experienced defensive line with a Mustafa Johnson, with a Nate Landman, even with Antonio Alfano, can expose this offensive line, which UCLA seems to be struggling with, I think that's one key place where Colorado can gain the advantage in the game.
I agree. So I think that, the way that the Buffs can most likely sort of take advantage of this UCLA team, the most notable loss that they have, right, is Josh Kelly. And, the fact that Josh Kelly's going to be out, out as in like he's gone to the NFL, he's off, to bigger and better things, far better than, an empty Rose Bowl that, where there's nobody there to watch him. That I think that it'll be really sort of beneficial that we have, Nate Landman, Mustafa Johnson, just being able to hammer them down the throats of UCLA. I mean, DTR, he's a fast quarterback, but they've got otherwise sort of they're trying to fill a lot of vacant shoes with their, with the rest of their team. And so I think that being, both teams have, newer sort of younger, less experienced offenses. However, I think that then you've got to look at like where is, who's going to have the defensive advantage. And I think that in terms of when it comes to getting those stops, I mean, it could be kind of a sloppy game, could be, sort of an in the trenches sort of battle. As we've talked about, it looks like that, is likely to be how a lot of our season is. However, I think that all that said, CU probably has the edge in terms of, even if you take two fairly rookie offenses, the defense, I think can definitely overpower their, very young sort of offense.
Yeah, I agree. I think I see the only way UCLA's offense really outplays Colorado is through DTR, just because of the fact that he is this dual threat quarterback. And we saw last year in the game against Arizona that Khalil Tate just ran all over us. He ran for like 370 yards. It was kind of ridiculous. Very winnable game for us that we lost that year. And I see like Dorian being that guy who will just solely put the offense on his back and exploit some hole in the Colorado defense, because there's bound to be one. There seems to always will be. But I do have a lot of confidence in this defense that we that we can just constantly get pressure to him and basically stop any part of the run game, whether it be the running backs or Thompson Robinson himself. And then I think that, like we said, in terms of talent, I think our running back core is more talented than they are, and I think that's a huge part of how we're going to win this game. Just because, like you said, and like we've said in the past, our games are going to be in the trenches. It's not going to be this air raid offense we saw last year with Steven Montez. But we have the talent running back to win these types of games.
Yeah, I think we've got So Karl Dorrell's obviously sort of hinted at the fact that his big thing is depth, right? And he's all about sort of like a next man up sort of mentality, sort of like Saban is, and all about sort of having not one, not three, but 4 or 5 running backs that he can toss in the game at any given point and have sort of equal confidence in. Obviously, we're returning some like veteran running backs in that position. However, I think that the fact that when you look at UCLA's roster and they've got this slew of either freshmen, redshirt sophomores, and then the occasional graduate transfer or redshirt senior in like Demetric Felton. It's the kind of thing that we have many more returning players in the backfield to be able to rely on with a younger quarterback. Whereas as the numbers sort of show from last year, DTR, when not running the ball himself, his main target more or less was Felton, who is himself a running back, not even a receiver. And Felton did catch, he ran for 433 yards on the ground, had 799 yards and 5 touchdowns sort of in his career as well, sort of, but those are all receiving. And so I think that just sort of when you look at the outsized amount of receiving yards he has compared to rush on the ground yards, I think that will play to Colorado's advantage, and Colorado will really be able to just bring the heat and sort of stack the center of the backfield and really just put a lot of pressure on DTR.
Yeah, I have to agree. When I did my research, the one interesting thing I found was that UCLA has to break in a new kicker and punter, and as we talked about, Colorado brings a lot of experience in those two positions. And that's a key part to almost every. It's a key part to football in general, but especially in college football, when your offense really isn't having it going, you can only get it barely into the other team's territory. Having someone who can kick consistent field goals and having a punter who can pin teams back within their own side of the 30, that's a big advantage Colorado can use to play, especially in this Colorado era. Stefano's used to kicking up here. It's not as much of a disadvantage to UCLA, but you just never know how, if someone doesn't train at altitude, they don't know the way their kicks are going to go. But we discussed last episode about just how crucial Stefano and whichever punter Dorrell chooses to go with, just how crucial they are to this offense. And especially in a game like this, where it's really going to be in the trenches and very rare to see big plays happen. Advantage Colorado in terms of special teams.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. Like I said the last episode, I think Stefano can have, he has a lot of potential to be sort of the dark horse, MVP in terms of for CU, in terms of the scoring chances that he might have or that might be sort of put onto him, as a means of Colorado just sort of getting barely into the red zone, not really being able to necessarily, convert on the ground or in the air. And as a result, sort of having to rely on just, knowing we can put 3 points on the board every time. And I think that, and he's been in plenty of situations where he's nailed absolutely massive kicks, with time running out, notably, last year with Nebraska and things like that. And so I think to see him, in the, in the backfield versus, a UCLA kicker who is just being a new, breaking in a new kicker in and of itself, it doesn't matter, like the altitude, that stuff, like, forget that. I mean,
Yeah.
let alone it's the big leagues, or bigger, compared to high school. And, that's a big adjustment to make. And, it doesn't, we know that both teams have had less sort of preseason training than they might normally, during the summer, given the sort of wonky schedule of the Pac-12 this year. And so I think that that'll definitely play to Colorado's advantage.
Yeah, I think so. And we have 10 days to wait and see, but like I said, we are 10 days away. But that being said, we still don't know who our quarterback's going to be. What we do know is that it's basically come down to Lytle and Neuer. So our hopes of Brendan Lewis being our starting QB has been tossed out the window by Coach Dorrell. But you think it's a little, I don't want to say disheartening, but we are 10 days away, and I would say at this point Colorado should have had someone named as a starter. I mean, I get why they've done it, but this is a decently big worry for this Colorado football team.
I 100% agree. I think that teams that try to do the two, like, I mean, so no team is going to ultimately have sort of like any kind of 2 quarterback system, obviously. You know what I mean? Like, just doing a back and forth there has to be consistency in the backfield. And having, I just think that if they could just settle on one to at least be taking the majority of the reps in practice, or at the very least, if they are doing that, tell us which one it is, so that way we can like at least have the peace of mind knowing that there is one of those guys who's taking the majority of the reps, behind center, in practice scrimmages and things like that. That would be, that would give me a lot of, sort of peace of mind. But, for all, like, to assume that they are sort of playing them both equally back there, I think that with 10, like you were saying, with 10 days left, I think that we need to be sort of settling in on letting, either one of these guys be taking the majority of the snaps and be doing just like sort of getting set to take over the University of Colorado offense, because we know that there's been so much fluctuation in terms of, we've gone through 3 head coaches in 3 years. There's been a lot of, like, in terms of leadership at, in CU football, there's been a lot of, there hasn't, like, there's not really been any consistency over the last, several years. We had Montez for, I guess, 2 years in the backfield, but it's just the kind of thing where we need to have just like a strong sort of like voice and leadership component to our CU football team, which is part of probably what's been lacking in our sort of consistency throughout the last couple of years. So I think that the sooner the better that they can name one of those guys the starter and just settle on that until proven otherwise, I think is what needs to happen.
Yeah, I think you said it right. The consistency factor, the fact that we have had 3 coaches in 3 years, especially for guys who started with McIntyre and then came in with Tucker, trusting that he was going to be the coach of the future, buying into that system, and then him snaking away to Michigan State, who lost to Rutgers and could not be happier about that. And then bringing in Karl Dorrell is just like, at what point do we finally have a consistency? And I think the quarterback position is just so important to have a consistency with that. 10 days away is like you're not giving whoever you choose a lot of time to really get a majority of reps. And like you said, I think it's time to choose someone, whether it be Neuer or Lytle. Even if it's not the right decision, let them go, like you said, until proven otherwise. And then come UCLA, if they don't perform, you put the other guy in. But at least you have some consistency for the next week and a half to really get that guy comfortable under that offense. That way, that he's prepared, knowing he's had 10 days of practice with the A squad of the offense with the offensive line, which they have basically come to a conclusion with. That he's not going in there feeling like, oh, I was named the starter 3 days ago. Like I don't know what's happening here. But I think the coaching staff, and this is probably on Dorrell, like he's got to realize that waiting until a week and a half away from game day it just gives any quarterback he chooses, even if he's a fifth-year senior, even if this happened with Montez last year, and if there were so happened to be a quarterback battle last year, like you're not giving Montez any time to get mentally prepared to be the number one starter.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And so, I think, again, one of the, I mean, so it starts with the leadership with just like the team in general, right? The quarterback, regardless of that, I mean, even though they're an offensive player, it's the kind of thing where an entire team looks to a quarterback. A quarterback sort of becomes the face of a program. It's just sort of the way that, the nature of football. And to say that, they have an outsized responsibility on the field compared to, most of the other players, while it sounds, frustrating or unfortunate or not, not necessarily true in every situation, like the reality is that it's true in most. Yeah, I mean, it's true for the most part. And
yeah,
I think then so to not only be able to start to develop that sort of leadership figurehead, and have the team be able to sort of rally around that single person. But I mean, and then furthermore, just sort of, on a less abstract note, to be able to sort of be developing the chemistry with, a younger wide receiver core, like we've talked about, in previous episodes, where, CU is dealing with, not too dissimilar to UCLA, dealing with a younger offense, filling a lot of gaps in, different positions and stuff. One of those being wide receiver. And so I think, and even if we had a veteran wide receiver core, the fact that all three of these quarterbacks, neither of them were the starters in the last, over the course of the last 3 years, that just means that like these guys have to be, like they all have to be developing chemistry with these receivers, and that means getting the most reps possible. And it, that doesn't mean half the reps in practice. That means, when you have 10 days left to the season and you've had this sort of condensed preseason to begin with, like you need every single rep with those guys you can. So that way, on those like post routes and things like that, like that, in terms of timing and things like that, there can be that trust between the receiver and receiver and the quarterback. Like they know when that ball is coming, and they can just like get the timing down, things like that. Because otherwise, we're just we're in for seeing a super sloppy Colorado offense that has been immensely frustrating to a lot of CU fans over the course of the last 2 years because of that lack of consistency.
Yeah, I agree. It's pretty well known around the Colorado football world now that there's no doubt this offense is going to be very run heavy. Just with that deep group of really talented running backs, which is a huge plus for this offense, considering we're going to have a first-year quarterback, even though two of these guys have been on the team for 3 years. But like you said, it's like you got to even you can't run the ball every single down. Like you're not going to run the ball on 3rd and 8. You're going to pass the ball just because that's a passing down. And like you said, if whoever they choose to be quarterback doesn't have that chemistry with not only his offensive line but with his very young wide receiver core outside of Katie Nixon and I believe Tony Brown, Demetrius Stanley. Sorry, your offense is not going to be successful. It's not going to be efficient, and you're gonna a lot of 3 and outs, and then at that point it's like, okay, well the passing game isn't working. Let me ride this run game even more, and then teams are going to figure out how to stop it because if we're a run heavy offense, they're just going to stack the line, and our running game is not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So, 10 days, yeah, in their mind, they probably think, okay, that's plenty of time for a quarterback to gain chemistry, but it really isn't, especially just because the two players they've narrowed it down to haven't played more than 10 snaps of in a college football game before, and like you said, it's quite possible that if they wait any longer, this offense is going to come out and look absolutely terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think, that it's just the sooner we can get to that point, the sooner we can get to that point, with just the consistency and stuff, the better. And I'd like to, until proven otherwise note, I'd like to trust that Karl Dorrell and Darren Chiaverini are, they know what they're doing, and these aren't things that they haven't considered previously. But until that I see, and so, I'm willing to have faith in the system for now. But
Yeah.
if then we show up and it's, we're playing UCLA, of all teams as our first game, and we can't complete a single pass, and we can't, and we're just trying to like run it on every single down, and getting absolutely stuffed at the line, and just trying to rely on this, sort of veteran offensive line as being, our sole saving grace on offense. I'm going to be pretty frustrated that you and I had this conversation, pointing these things out, and we're not getting paid to help the CU offense, run. And so I think that, in the meantime, I'm gonna trust this. I'm gonna trust the system and try to have some faith in it. But I really hope that 10 days from now, that doesn't start to let me down.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And like you said, I'm a glass half full right now. But if that offense comes out and looks just sluggish, I'm going to be like, well, we could have solved this problem 10 days ago.
Yeah,
we could have solved this problem a month ago.
For real.
And it's the small things that are gonna help Colorado win games, like we discussed last episode, and it's the small things that are gonna make Colorado lose games. And this is a small thing that's gonna make Colorado lose a game. Yeah. That being said, we are just about 2 weeks done with practice, and as we discussed the quarterback situation, Dorrell has also touched on other positions, giving us a lot of praise, as we've expected, to that defense and that offensive line. Kieran, I don't know what you've been hearing, but if you have heard anything, what do you think?
I mean, so I've heard generally high praise seemingly from the coaches all around. They had a scrimmage. It was last weekend, and sort of just an inter squad scrimmage, and the coaches walked away from that, with a lot of praise for everybody. But I will say on that note, like Darren Chiaverini had a lot of praise for Brandon Lewis, even though he's obviously not going to become the starter, and and he's not even in talks for being the starter, at this moment. Now, so I think that the coaches walking away from the scrimmage, from the scrimmage at the very least, just because it's sort of the most game-like thing we've been able to sort of, or the coaches at least have been able to sort of analyze our players, within, and to sort of see them a little bit more in a game-like situation as opposed to just in, drills and things. I take it as a positive that they have, mostly high praise for players. At the same time, I don't think going into the first game of a season, any coaching staff is going to be particularly negative across the board. I mean, you do get the Nick Saban where, like, you win a national championship and it's still like, he could just spend the entire press conference telling you all about how much, like, what they could have done better, and like how he would have liked to have seen it done differently, and how it's just not good enough. And I mean, Nick Saban can do Nick Saban. I think for Colorado football, I think for a new coach, in Boulder, with Karl Dorrell, I think it's good to see that he has some faith in his players. But there's been so much, as you said, sort of positive praise here and there. I'm almost sort of curious as to where the actual concerns, or sort of trepidations about the upcoming season actually lie, because it's hard to sort of see through just some generally pretty vague praise, for the team, just liking what they're seeing out there, we're working hard, this, that, the sort of usual garb and garb that you hear from from coaches.
Yeah. I think you said something interesting, like, wondering what's the negative. It's like, going back to the whole conversation, the QB conversation, it's like, there's some worry there. Like, I gotta believe that, there's some reason why they haven't announced a QB 10 days away from from game one. It's like, are they not confident in Lytle and Neuer? They just kind of like narrowed it down because they have the most experience. But I just think this Colorado team is in such need of a change, and that I think we talked about this already, that Brendan Lewis is that change, and there's no expectations for this Colorado team that I think putting in, you can do no harm putting Lewis in. Listen, if for some miracle he gets to start at UCLA and just does absolutely terribly, okay, fine. You put in Lyle and Neuer and they do better, assuming because they have the experience. But at least you try to implement some change into this Colorado team. That, like you said, that Cheverino has had such high praise in Brendan Lewis that the sheer fact that they want to get him implemented into that offensive scheme, not at quarterback, just shows how much of an athlete he is and just how big of an impact he's going to have on this Colorado offense once Lytle and Neuer, assuming they leave next year, or assuming that Lewis beats him out next year for the quarterback job. That I just think they're making the wrong decision. That there's still some worry and there's still some second guessing in terms of the quarterback position. But Dorrell and the whole entire offensive coaching staff has had super high praise for the running back core, especially Fontenot, being the junior, being the more experienced running back who's going to lead this running back core.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. So I think that the almost sort of the fact that Dorrell's running this sort of, running back by committee situation with the running backs is, to me, I almost sort of, having played sports in high school and stuff, I almost see that as a little bit more like he's got, not like less so, I mean, I know this sounds sort of a little bit initially counterintuitive, but I see that as less so him lacking faith in the running backs and more so seeing like, like, I know you guys are already really good, and so I'm putting you on notice though that like nobody's position safe, and this is the way we're going to be running the offense from the backfield, and as a result, the running backs have to sort of like rise to that level of expectation, right? I think alternatively, when there's this when we see this sort of indecisiveness with the with the quarterbacks and things like that, I think that is indicative of sort of like a second guessing back and forth. And the one thing, you've got to remember is that Karl Dorrell didn't recruit any of these players, right? So, I mean, and, Mel Tucker didn't recruit, like, I mean, he's playing with Mel Tucker's players. Mel Tucker was playing with, I'm totally blanking.
McIntyre's players.
Yeah, McIntyre. I was like totally blanking. I had the face right there. But yeah, so it's like, as a result of having, 3 coaches in 3 years, right? We've got one coach playing with one previous coach's players, and then he goes out and recruits a bunch of players that he doesn't ultimately get to coach, right? Yeah. And then the next coach inheriting that guy's players. And so as a result, that's definitely, that definitely accounts for a lot of Colorado's, struggles, and sort of inconsistencies, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, because these guys, they come in with their sort of plan for how to run the offense, how to run the defense, things like that, and they haven't gotten to pick the pieces that necessarily fit into all of those slots. And so I think that Dorrell deserves a bit of grace this year, however things go, due to the fact that he was literally brought in like just before the summer hit. It was like sort of late spring or whatever. You know what I mean? And so I think that he deserves a little bit of grace there. And that said, we still have to be a little bit more decisive in terms of, at least sharing with the media and, sharing with their players what kind of decisions they're making in terms of putting quarterbacks in the right spot, putting running back, how they're going to run the running backs, how they're going to, who's going to be starting in the wide receiver slots, who's going to be like supporting Landman and, Mustafa, in the backfield and stuff like that. And so I'd like to see just a little bit more decisiveness from them, just because I think it exudes a little bit more confidence.
Yeah, I have to agree. 10 days away. We'll have another show before then. But that being said, that wraps it up for this episode of Buffalo Dash. We want to thank you guys so much for coming again. Follow us on social media, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Check out our website, dashboards.tv. If you want to see some more of us and more of the other shows, I definitely recommend it. Also, check out Sports Pac-12. We have a cool partnership going on. They'll be streaming our live shows. We'll be writing some articles for them. It's a great partnership. It's great stuff. That being said, I want to thank you guys so much for coming, and we'll see you next week when it will be 3 days away from the